check instead of the participants, double check to make sure they're not in the attendee. Yep.
Can you hear me? Yep, I've got you. I think I'm on now. Hey, John. Hey. Let me get everything going.
John, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you joining us. We can. Yes, thank you. Okay.
Is someone able to launch the PowerPoint?
John, we're going to give us a second. I want to work on the delay. We're getting some feedback in the boardroom, okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how's new chat?
You don't want to take there's something in the front. Are you eating the conditions?
John, can you hear us?
Yes. Yeah, you're very clear. Are you able to hear me okay?
John, sound check again. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. There we go.
Okay. John, thank you for joining us. Really, I believe this is toward the tail end of the feasibility study findings. And, after hearing the information, seeing the information that was sent earlier this week, next week we'll have to talk about the next steps and how to proceed. John's going to talk about that a little bit tonight, and then wrap up some of the cost savings that come along with this, and briefly talk about athletics as well. So John, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
All right. Thank you. So tonight I promise you this is a very brief presentation. We have essentially 3 topics to cover. As Superintendent mentioned, to kind of check the box questions, and then just some loose ends on the study piece. So if you advance to the next slide, we're really going to talk about 3 items which were provided to the board, I believe sometime last week or earlier this week, which consists of a written narrative report on the middle school, high school outdoor athletic facilities assessment. So you should have received about a 9-page written report that has some photos and documentation and input from meetings with the administrative team members regarding athletics and field usage and so forth. Steckbeck Engineering prepared the athletic facilities report, and then we jointly worked together to produce a cost estimate for the recommendations. So as you page through the report, you'll find each of the images are labeled, and then there is an assessment of the condition and observations that were made and input provided to the civil engineers, covering not just fields, all structures and so forth that serve the high school football stadium and surrounding fields. If you turn to the back 3 pages, we then take those observations and then provide a list of recommendations, which starts on page 9 of that report. And it corresponds to the same order that the assessment is written. And you'll notice there's a couple things. The purpose of the study is not only to identify the immediate need, but what about in the next 3 to 5 years? So you'll see a couple areas where, as an example, the tennis courts, they can continue to be cleaned and some repair, but probably within about 5 years, you're looking at a more comprehensive resurfacing that is more than just cosmetic. So that's an example of the range of and duration of each of these issues. So that was the written report, and then the last page was an Excel document, and that was a spreadsheet that we then took the each of the items, again in corresponding order of the narrative, and we put a cost range to each of the items, so you would have an order of magnitude on what are we talking about in terms of repairs or improvements. So just like the study, it's a cost range, give you an order of magnitude, and it's a combination of input that we receive from the district and then observations and recommendations from us as architects and also SpecTech from the civil engineering side. And as an example, stadium lighting, that is something we commonly see, that if districts want to explore going to an LED lighting fixture at the stadium, what does that entail? Are you able to reuse the existing poles, or are they not high enough? So you'll see items in here that may not necessarily have become a specific request, but they're kind of a menu of improvements, you will, that we know typically districts are considering the cost. Probably the most significant cost would be the construction associated with restroom facilities or concession. So they're rather large numbers, and one of the reasons why is restroom facilities are dictated by the IBC code in terms of the number of bleacher seats. And that is how you determine the actual requirement for the numbers of fixtures. And you can see in the report, they're quite large, considerably larger than anything you have down there now, but that is a requirement to meet the current building code. So you can run down through each of these items and see. The other big thing, there was a lot of observation about compliance with the bleachers, which is normal in terms of ramps, the railing spacing, heights, and so forth, and of course signage that's required. The other larger line item is in fact the court resurfacing, which if you continue to maintain it as well as it is now, probably within the next 3 to 5 years, you'd be looking at a more comprehensive court resurfacing. So the written narrative with recommendations and cost was certainly an item we talked about previously. And I know there's a lot of information here, but does anybody have any specific questions about anything they saw in the narrative, or if you feel that you need any additional information or detail?
John, those items that were listed in there, we would talk about which items we would be interested in as we go through the next phase. Is that correct?
Yes, and you know, as we have talked with the administrative team, there is some value, particularly when you look at standalone facilities like restrooms, concessions, or standing alone team rooms. When those projects are bid all by themselves, the cost per square foot escalates fairly quickly. What we would suggest is, as we go into schematic design with the elementary school, is to figure out perhaps what you might want to do as a district and a board, and include that as a bid alternate with the larger project. That way, all of the trades, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and general construction and site work are going to be on the adjacent site. There's definitely always a better value if you can include some of those projects with a larger project. So yes, there's plenty of time to shake out what makes the most sense and where you are from a budget perspective.
John, I had a quick question regarding the concessions. We've heard a lot from our community about the inadequacy of the concessions. Does your proposal anticipate new construction of the concession facility or renovation of the existing?
That's a good question. The cost that we are showing is approximately 2,000 square feet. We took an estimate of how large the restroom facility would need to be for compliance. And there is also about an 800 square foot concession area. So we're proposing new construction to get a compact footprint and all of those kind of intensive utility areas all into one central location.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, moving on, and if anyone has any questions as we move through, we can obviously jump back. It's essentially these 3 items. So the second category that we wanted to assist the district with is the operational savings. So we worked along closely with the district with the program and using the schematic design of the proposed K-6 elementary, evaluated staffing. So I'll turn it back over to the superintendent, talk a little bit more about our logic and process.
Well, as you know, we have a lot of situations where we have unbalanced classrooms across the district. Because of that, we have a situation where in some cases we might have a building with a class of 11 and another grade level we might have a class of 25. And as we were looking at how to accomplish this, Dr. Witham, I think, is with us, but he did a pretty detailed, he showed you before projections in terms of attendance or in terms of children coming, projections. And then we took that and then broke that down into, what that would mean in terms of classes. I believe at one point, and Fred, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at one point he told me that if we snapped our fingers last year and we went from 4 buildings to 1 building, it would mean 12 less classrooms that we would fill. Obviously, there's a savings that comes there. I want to make it very, very clear that we are not interested in cutting teachers. That we would want to go from where we are now to where we want to be through natural attrition. And I have no desire to have any teachers that are out of a job because of the potential to look at an elementary building across the street. And I want to make that clear right now. Having said that, that's currently with the decrease in enrollment. Then there becomes even potentially more, up to the point, and Kirk, can you unmute Dr. Witham there, if you would? I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, but and I will say also, all of these documents were in the process of putting on the website under its own, under a feasibility study portion of the website. But I believe it's in a few years, based on enrollment, it's almost about 20 positions, and that does not include support positions. That's just classrooms based on projected enrollment. Fred, did you want to chime in on that?
No, I did the analysis using the enrollment projections. I think we tried to err on the side of assuming that you will have spikes in enrollment as well as decreases in enrollment, as you historically have, and that's built into that analysis. I do think the most telling is it is an evaluation moving forward, but we can absolutely say with certainty what it would have been last year given the program, and the number that you gave earlier was correct. And based on all the models, which are running very close to each other, you would likely continue to gain efficiencies over the next 5 years. Beyond 5 years, staffing can be impacted by so many things beyond enrollment, but I think well within the 5-year limits that are in that report, you're going to see additional savings from what you would have seen at the beginning of last year if this were in fact in place.
Thank you. Any questions about that part of it? Okay, and I believe energy's last, right, John?
Yeah. So also in your handout, there was an assessment, again, more engineering actually, worked with the administrative team to capture 2 years of actual utility costs from each of the elementaries, ran that analysis, and then took the proposed building and its square footage and modeled it using Department of Energy approved program that allows you to enter and make certain assumptions about geographic location, hours of occupancy, and historical weather. So it's as, I guess, as precise of an assessment as you can get in an energy modeling scenario. And what we arrived at was the combined square footage of the 4 elementary schools is approximately 165,000 square feet. The proposed K-6 building with the DAO is about 175,000 square feet. So it's about 10,000 square feet larger for programmatic reasons. And again, building code, sizing, spaces like cafeterias and so forth in the kitchens. And More Engineering's cost energy savings analysis produced about a 17% reduction in cost. So again, to connect the dots, we're looking at a building about 10,000 square feet larger than the existing facilities, and it'll operate at about a $23,000 or $24,000 a year less cost to operate a larger building. So that was kind of the last piece to evaluate in terms of other savings that could be realized.
And John, I'm just going to clarify. You said handout. I actually emailed the board, so they're probably looking for a piece of paper, but it's in there. They had an email with an attachment.
Oh, sure.
Which I'm sure they all memorized and looked at very carefully over the last couple of days.
Plenty of things to read, I'm sure. Thank you. Any questions about the energy modeling and savings that are estimated?
I have a question about the energy savings. So that 17% reduction in costs, equivalent to $24,000 a year, is that just using our standard electricity? That's not including any type of solar or renewable energy? And if we were to consider that, how would that impact this?
Yeah, sure, that's a good question. So one of the things the engineers should do during schematic design and early design development, it takes them time to fully, actually, we as the architects need to fully establish a building design for them to evaluate the cost of a solar array, and then what those savings might be versus the initial capital expenditure. So we need a little bit more time and further development into the design to address that, and then show the board, hey, for capital expenditure of X to the project, here is what the reduction could be. And really what you want to know as a board member, what does the payback look like? And generally speaking, districts that see things in less than 7 or 8 or 9 years, that's a fairly quick payback. If for some reason the payback would be significantly longer, we would let you know that, hey, you're approaching now the lifespan of the solar panel, and the 18 or 20-year payback might not make sense. So that's an analysis that we have yet to do, but we need to be a little bit further in the design.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
John, do you work with the local utility to take advantage of efficiencies that they offer and rebates that they have for new builds through their energy efficiency programs?
Yeah, Ken Kaufman and I work together on a lot of projects together, and they have helped actually write grants to help with utility companies and the district to kind of put you in the best position. If it's gas, talking about what that rate might be as a, school districts are lifelong consumers, so utility companies will entertain those kinds of things. And to the extent that if you get to like a backup fuel system, let's say it's oil, what that rate might be. So yeah, the engineering team is very versed in working with them to try to help, garner the best rate and ultimately the best operational system for the district.
Thanks.
Sure.
John, have you guys been able to look at if we did nothing, what the ongoing maintenance costs look like for our buildings versus once we move to a new? I know you tried to do a complete reno versus renovation of all buildings versus this, but what if we do nothing and we move? What do you guys know what those maintenance costs might look like?
That might be something we work a little bit more closely with the admin team again and Mason to, we I think tended to focus more on what would the savings be as a result of having a new building, but we could probably isolate those costs, and doing nothing might have something more than a cost. If it's a building system that might not operate, that could be a bigger issue than a cost, like a boiler certification that can't be met because of a fractured component in the boiler that won't get approved. So we can take another look at that.
Was there somebody speaking? Was anything looked at maybe as busing? Would there be a busing savings for a centrally located elementary school? I'm just kind of thinking kids out in Greenpoint that might have to, buses that go from Greenpoint and out to the Dauphin County line in East Hanover, would we be able to accrue any savings in busing as well as staffing and energy costs and the ongoing maintenance stuff?
John, I can talk about that a little bit. Probably not, because you're gonna, from an elementary standpoint, you're going to be bringing kids to a more central location. But to be honest, the transportation formula is complicated. I couldn't sit here and tell you it. We can ask Mrs. Martin to work on that a little bit, to calculate what that is. But I don't know that it's going to be any significant savings. It makes it a little easier from a logistical standpoint, but not necessarily from a cost standpoint.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question that goes back to the operational savings. So the potential need for 20 less classrooms, that is assuming, or that is calculated based on our current situation of half-day kindergarten. Is that correct?
I think Fred's muted again, but
Yeah.
that is based on over what we currently have, yes. Any additional programming that we would change would obviously alter the number of positions that we would save.
That is correct. That's how that was calculated.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if we're quite that far yet or not, but the proposed centrally located or all-in-one elementary school, would that, as we're kind of looking at things now, does that open the door for having full-day kindergarten? Is that part of the equation that we're looking at now?
I was comparing apples with apples, so I was looking at maintaining the program. You would have to simply build in the appropriate number of rooms in addition and the additional staff that you would require to go from a half a day to a full day. And of course, then that would just be offset by the number that you're saving, which would likely be more, given the number of kindergarten sections at half day that you're currently supporting.
All right, we would do the staffing through the budget process. I believe we have 7 classrooms. Is it 7, John, for kindergarten
Yeah, I think we're 7 deep with some flex classrooms and collaborative spaces, so there's some room.
Right, so there's more than the 4 kindergarten class. There's space for the more that we currently have in that original design. But that's just a preliminary thing. That the nuts and bolts of what specifics we want come in the next phase.
Okay, I thought that the space was there, but we would if we went with full day, we would potentially not be saving those 20 positions.
Right, and whatever we added would come off of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, then the next slide is the last one. Simply, we had proposed, and we had discussed the schedule previously in order to, I think, as an example, the nature of the kinds of the questions are really an authorization to proceed with the schematic design is what we're proposing for the September 8th board meeting. That'll initiate us to be able to engage all the consultants, start the municipal planning process, and most importantly, the overall schedule. The biggest impact is land development plan approval. So there are a lot of variables, but the authorization to proceed with schematic allows us to really transition out of the study. We need to put together a detailed project schedule. We'll be meeting with the administrative team and very specifically talking about the final program and really developing the design. STECBEC, because the board authorized the site survey 2 months ago, the land survey and the topography and all the utilities are ready. We have all that information. So we propose the board consider a September 8th approval to authorize the start. The AIA owner-architect agreement between us and the district has been completed, and that motion will allow us to proceed with the design.
And that's the phase two. We would involve the public for feedback at that point. Certainly the board and the different stakeholders is where you would gather information from the different stakeholders in this phase, correct?
Yeah, and you should see, the board should expect, we would most likely, because of the time frame we're trying to get the project out to the earliest bid, we would probably be in front of the board every month for an update, providing information to the public, gathering information and feedback, and then making the revisions and then subsequent updates to the board the following month. And then the board would be required to authorize us to proceed in each phase of the design. So there would be monthly reports back to the board.
Any other questions for John? Okay, John, well, thank you again.
Okay.
And we'll go through things this week and talk next week then.
Sure. Any additional follow-up questions, just please forward to me as you have, and we'll talk again. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Thank you,
John.
guys. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 4, items for discussion notification. The minutes shall note that public notice was given for the meeting in accordance with Act 83 of 1986. Notices and advisements of these meetings will carry the intent that limited business may be conducted on any scheduled meeting date. Moving on to item 5, the consent calendar.
Yeah, item 5, our normal approval of minutes, the student activity count, and our cash disbursements for next week.
Any questions about those items? Any opposition to having them as consent? All right. Moving on to item 6. That was just item 5. All right, item number 6, budget and finance.
2 items for you. One is WellSpan for school physicians for the upcoming school year, and the dollar amount for physicals, $10 for physicals. And then we have, you guys have the election of PSBA officers, which Michelle is finally showing the, the ballot that needs to be filled out and given to Pat.
So everybody has that in their folder for tonight. And that will be voted on next week. Any questions about those items? All right.
Do we need to put for the agenda next week a potential vote on phase 2 for this development project? Would it be under building and finance, or I'm sorry,
It won't
budget
be
and
under
finance?
consent, it'll be a discussion. This is just consent items for next week. We will add that as a discussion item after the consent calendar is voted on next week.
I apologize. Thank you.
No problem.
Good question. All right, any discussion on budget and finance? Okay, moving on to, for item 7, buildings and grounds, there are no items for this, this month. And then extracurricular.
The annual athletic training clinical educational affiliation agreement between LVC and NLSD is on there. That's something we do every year, and some additional coaches to help out with things for this upcoming year on there as well.
Any comments, questions on those items? All right, item 9 is curriculum, just one item there.
Yeah, we've talked about flexible instructional days. I explained in the past, those are days that we can use for snow days. What we would do is we would use one of the scheduled snow days as a flexible instructional day, meaning that there would be assignments for students to complete either on that day or prior to that day allowing us some flexibility to not have to actually be in school on that day, but instead use it as what they call a flexible instructional day. But in order to do that, we need to take some of our snow days and designate those, which would mean we would slightly revise the calendar to reflect those. There would be 3 of those days. And since we are practicing how to do things synchronously and asynchronously, it's a good year probably to be able to add those.
Any questions about that item? Okay, and then our last item for tonight is human relations.
Yeah, letter A is a list of additional professional substitutes to approve. And letter B is a classified substitute. Letter C are leave requests. Letter D, I have several resignations. Letter E, to ratify and approve following the employments. A lot of those employments are long-term substitute teachers, some of which were used to reduce classroom sizes and some of which were used to fill in for teacher leaves. Item F is the list of mentors for the school year. And item G is the staff advancement for academic credits for the year, or for September.
Are there any comments or questions about those items?
Yes, I've already filled out the form, but I'll be abstaining from item E, number 4.
Any other comments? All right, that is the end of our agenda for this evening. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
We will need an executive session announced for Thursday evening.
Okay, so the board will be meeting in executive session Thursday evening to discuss personnel as well. And we'll be meeting immediately following this meeting tonight also. Is there anything else? Then I call this meeting adjourned. Have a good night.